Hey everyone, I'm Angela Lynn.
And I'm Jesse Lynn, and welcome back to another episode of But Where Are You Really From?
Today is the Friday before 4th of July. Happy 4th of July long weekend. And in celebration of that, we are doing another episode loosely based on 4th of July and reflecting on our Americanness. We have done 2 or 3 episodes, I think, specifically on reflecting on our Americanness on the respective 4th of Julys. So this episode, we're taking it a little bit differently, and it is inspired by social media comments.
We love social media.
I mean, y'all, there's a reason though why we post a lot on social media. It's because that's where a lot of conversations happen, and whether or not we agree with all those opinions is, you don't agree with everything, but it often sparks interesting conversation. So some of the comments that we frequently get when we post our episodes where we're discussing identity and kind of being this stretch between two cultures as Asian Americans, we often get comments from, I'm going to be gracious and just say non-Asian people, telling us that we should be de-emphasizing the race part of who we are. A common comment that we get is something to the effect of, why do you have to keep emphasizing that you're Asian Americans? Why can't you just say you're American? Like, we should just all embrace being Americans. Stop trying to divide our country. So, with that setup in mind, the topic we're discussing today is to what extent we should be embracing the non-American cultural side of who we are. So, Taiwanese-American to be specific. So, how much should we be emphasizing our Taiwanese side versus our American side versus just being quote-unquote American? General thoughts?
So we're now on all video platforms. So y'all, if you don't see my face right now, not the people telling the people how to feel about themselves. I feel like if you're listening to this and that's your takeaway, you didn't quite understand the point of the podcast. We call it an Asian American experience because we're not just all about this piece, but we're also about thinking about this piece. It's like the intersection, not that we are all focused about Asian things. We do have a lot of topics that discuss like our Asian heritage being Taiwanese, but that's because that's the most mysterious part of it. It's the part that we don't understand the most because we're so estranged. We didn't grow up there. There's a lot of things we have to learn about it. The American part of it, of course, like we grew up here. We understand. We speak English. Like we have had all these watershed cultural moment experiences that are like uniquely American. We understand all these things. So like there's no point in dissecting it to a detail because they're already inherently part of what we know. The reason that, at least for me, that we talk about Asianness, being people of color, being Taiwanese, like all of those concepts is because those are things that we don't usually talk about. They're not usually things that are open conversations with other people. It becomes more interesting to discuss because we've never really had a chance to disseminate that and circulate it and see what other people were thinking about it.
And I would add that it's what makes us different and makes our experience different than your average quote unquote American. I think the presumption of saying, like, why can't you just emphasize that you're American instead of whatever your race plus American? Your assumption is that we have the ability to just be and be seen as American. And that is honestly, that is a huge assumption to be making because the whole point of why we talk about a lot of this is because we aren't always accepted as Americans. We literally both grew up in the US, born and raised. So as American as you could possibly be from that respect. But because we look Asian, there's always going to be a significant portion of people, even in our own country, who should be our fellow brethren, right? Who do not see us as Americans. So who are you to tell us that we should just be proud to call ourselves just Americans when, like, you're probably the same types of people who tell us we're not American, you know what I mean? So it's funny when we get those comments because it's like, I mean, to some extent, I agree with you in that, like, there's a lot of divisiveness in the country and there's no need to create further division. I don't think we ever talk about being Asian American in the sense of, like, let's segregate our little community and, like, all Asian power, you know, like trying to, like, raise up our group as, like, the new superior racial group or whatever. That's not how we talk about it. We're just talking about how literally being Asian ethnically impacts our life experience as Americans. It's not trying to stretch for something. It's literally part of who we are because it's how we look, it's how we were raised, it's what our families came from. Like, we can't segregate that, and we're not doing it to divide. It's similar to our previous conversation about cultural appropriation versus cultural appreciation. Like, to what extent is, in this context, sharing about our culture and sharing about our experiences as a result of our cultural influence seen as divisive as opposed to something positive that adds to the supposed melting pot that America should be? Because America didn't get founded on the idea of, hey, all you people from all these countries, come together and erase your cultures and just be American. It was like, hey, everyone's an immigrant who's coming here. Let's, like, all supposedly share and combine cultures and, like, make a new thing. So I think it's been extreme in both senses, where it's like people are getting ultra protective about their cultures and saying, like, cultural appropriation to everything, and then other people are saying, like, oh, you're sharing about your culture, like, you're not American, you're trying not to emphasize the American part because you're talking about being Chinese or Korean or whatever. It's like, bro, no.
Hey listeners, wondering how you can support us? The biggest way is by increasing our visibility by following us on Instagram at Where Are You From Pod, on TikTok at But Where Are You Really From, subscribing to our YouTube channel under But Where Are You Really From Podcast, rating and reviewing us on Apple Podcasts, and telling your friends. The more people we can get to listen to the show, the more we can continue spotlighting different perspectives and stories. And if you feel so inclined, we're also accepting donations at buymeacoffee.com/whereareyouFrom. Thanks, y'all.
I feel like part of the point of our podcast is to celebrate the Asian Taiwanese heritage that we come from. And I do feel like you make a really good point that a lot of these topics are seen as black and white. Just because we celebrate that heritage doesn't mean that we don't celebrate the fact that we're Americans or, like, that we don't like living here. I think in and of itself, the fact that we do an episode every year reflecting on what it means to be an American is a celebration of being an American, that we are thinking about what that means to us, why it's important to us, how does that connect to, like, our community and, like, other people in our lives. That is a celebration of being American, to really reflect on what that means to you. So it's sad that people hear this and instead of triggering their own thinking about what it means to live in this country, what these values are, American values, that they see it as, like, an othering experience that speaks more to the person that's listening than it does to what we're putting out there.
Yeah. And on the flip side, because we're talking about to what extent should we be emphasizing the ethnic portion of the hyphenated term we are, so the Taiwanese or Asian part, as opposed to the American part. So we've been talking about the way that other Americans who aren't Asian may be looking at us and the way that we discuss identity. But something else that we've talked about a lot that's fascinating to us, because it's like, is when Asian people on social media, that's our main exposure to all these different groups of people, right, that we don't encounter on, like, a daily basis. But Asian people from Asia, literally the continent, comment on our stuff and they're like, who are you to talk about Asian things? You're, like, not even Asian. And they mean it with, like, the most serious intent, right? Like, you're not Asian. So then it's like, okay, people in general, like, which one do you want us to be? Because you're simultaneously telling us you aren't Asian, but there's another group of people saying, okay, yeah, I see you're Asian, but just stop talking about it. There's just all these, like, little bubbles of people that are trying to tell us who we are and trying to strip actual parts of our identity away way and tell us how we should be seeing ourselves and living our lives. And it's like, oh, I'm sorry, can I just like switch my skin and my eyes and like suddenly be Caucasian or something? Because otherwise I am Asian, man, to like from like an ethnicity racial standpoint, even if my nationality is American. So it's just like, oh, if this was just a little quick flip of the switch, like, why don't you just wrap me in a new skin costume over here?
I think it's funny because you've mentioned before that people have accused us of gatekeeping what it means to be Asian, but like what you literally described is gatekeeping what it means to be Asian. For those people who are saying that and they're Asian, explain to me what makes an Asian an Asian. Give me the 10 facets of what makes an Asian Asian. Can you do that? Because if you can, like, let's have a conversation. Maybe you're right. But if you're just telling me, like, I'm not Asian because I don't belong to the group that you belong to because you grew up in a different place or you had a different experience, sweetie, that's everybody. Everybody grew up in a different place, had a different experience than you. Like, I'm sorry, like, that's not a place that you can stand on and have any footing. I think people take the things that we say as an absolute, and that's not what it's meant to be. It's meant to be an exploration of what it means and how we feel about being Asian while being American. We're not like standing on it being like, this is it. This is the whole truth and nothing but the truth. We're just trying to figure out what it means to be those things for us. And like maybe that it doesn't mean that for you, and that's totally fine, but that doesn't invalidate the exploration that we're going through.
Yeah, and just to throw them the little bone, most of the time when the Asians in Asia are saying the thing about, like, you're not even Asian, they are literally just talking about nationality, like passport, which passport you hold, and thereby which country you grew up in, because they've never had to think about race and ethnicity, so they don't even use that lens when they think about, like, who we are.
I have a Taiwanese passport.
I know, right? So do I, bitch. But we didn't grow up there, so that's where a lot of it's coming from, and I get that.
My opinion is always to celebrate all of those parts of yourself that make yourself unique. And I think that there's always going to be this feeling of unwholeness when you deny yourself a part of yourself, because I think you're always going to be curious about the part that you deny. You know, you always are like, like, what's over there? Like, what's that about? What's that like? And so, like, the more you celebrate the distinct parts of yourself, I think the more you get to know yourself better and you become like a more whole person.
Therefore, embrace all parts of yourself. And that leads us to a question for you listeners. No matter which background you have yourself, our question to you is it worth it to embrace the multiple aspects of your cultural identity? And if so, to what extent? Have you also experienced this encounter with other people when they assert an opinion about the way you should be looking at your identity? How have you responded to that kind of assertion? I just think it's a very interesting topic to be reflecting on during this 4th of July weekend, because while we are American, and I for one am still always very proud to be American, I am not just purely American because my family is from Taiwan, and I will always celebrate that cultural aspect of who I am. And I think that's what America should be proud of, is that we are made up of all these different cultures that make us way more interesting than if we didn't. So I'll leave it at that. And with that, this is our final episode for this current batch. We will be going on a break for a couple of weeks so that we can recharge mentally, come back with more interesting topics for y'all. And we're always very interested in your feedback. So if you have certain topics that you are interested in us discussing on the show, definitely hit us up on social media. That's where we engage with all of you. And come back in a few weeks. We will announce when that will be. And in the meantime, listen back on all of our past episodes if you miss us. And until next time, 再见, bitches.